In this video, I'm going to talk about what a population pyramid is and how it can be used to compare populations, and also what it can tell us about that population. So population pyramids are shown with age running vertically. So we're going from 0 to 4 years old. So it's in 4-year age brackets, all the way up to sometimes 80 or 100 plus. So we'll go up to 100 plus years up the side. They are then split into our male and female populations. Running along the bottom will be how much. So sometimes this is shown as a percentage, or sometimes this is shown as a number in thousands, but this is simply our amount. So let's say that we're going to go for percent of males in the population, percent of females. And there are certain key ages that are worth noting. So the first one is between 0 to 4 years old, and 10 to 14, 15 to 19 is our first age group. And then when we get to 60 to 64 and 65 to 69. So those ages are what we then call, so we'll split our graph up like that. These are what are called our dependent population. And in the middle, we have our active population. How they're then shown is that it's drawn showing the proportion of ages up the side. And what we might see is a population structure that looks a bit like this. So it looks really, really triangular. But one of the ways to think about it is if we turn it on its side like that, what we're basically looking at is a graph then that as people become older, we can see that the amount of people, we've got a high amount of people in this population that are 0 to 4, but then as they become older, there's less and less and less and less, and we can see the trend line disappearing down for males. And then similarly for females, and we're looking at it sort of back to front. So again, we've got a really young people over here and a really old people over here, and the trend for females is exactly the same. Over time, the amount of females is decreasing. One of the other things that we can add in is our proportion of 15 to 44-year-olds, specifically for women. So at 40 to 44, 45 to 49 years for women only, we also have another measure. So what we've got then between these years is that while these are the active females, this also marks the ages at which women are most likely to have children. So between the ages of 15 and 45 is our sort of like our fertility period in which women will have children. So this is the basic structure that we've got. Both halves of our population, gender assigned at birth. We've got males to the left, females to the right. Sometimes the ages are written up the middle or they're written to the side. We can see that we've got increasing age from the youngest to the oldest, and that in our population there are two key groups. So we've got the youngest children at the bottom, and at 14 to 15 years we split them off. Generally above 15 years classed as then adults and working. When we get to 64 to 65 years, what we've then got is that over here we've got the elderly, because generally 65 would be sort of looking at retirement ages. So they are classed as dependents, the elderly. The young are classed as dependents because both of these age groups rely on the middle part for their support. So the parents support the children, or the adults then provide care for the elderly. They depend on the middle part. So what can it tell us about a population? Okay, well there's a couple of different things that we can tell from our population. So depending on what shape it is, 16, we might have our population which looks, if I'd redraw it, like that. So with this population, what we can say here is that this population has, at the bottom of its pyramid, the graph has a wide base. There's a wide base to the graph. What we can then see is on both sides is that in this part, the graph is clearly narrowing quickly. As people become older, the amount of them decreases. And then at the top, what we've got is we've got very few, okay? So then it's, well, what does that tell us about population? If those are the things we see, what do they tell us? So what a wide base can tell us is that we have a high birth rate. Where it's narrowing, so as we can see the graph becoming narrower, 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 where it's narrowing, we can see that that's telling us that we have a high death rate. Now what we might see is we might see chunks taken out. So I'll redraw that to show what it might look like if we have chunks, because a narrowing might not just be that people are dying, a narrowing might be that people are migrating, people are leaving the country. But generally in a population where it's fairly obvious that it's just progressively getting narrower and there's no extra bits being added on or dents out of it, we can see it's narrowing. It's going to be a high death rate. What we've got with very few who are 65 plus, then that's telling us that life expectancy in this country is short. Okay, so our descriptions are that looking at the graph, we've got a wide base. We can see that on both sides it's getting narrower, and there are very few who are making it above 65 years. That tells us that this country has a high birth rate with the wide base. It tells us that as people become older, they die with a high death rate. And because people are dying, then very few are making it to old age. So this country has a short life expectancy. Alternatively, what we might see instead is that we might see a different structure. So again, 15, 65. Is we might see something a bit more like this. Where it doesn't really look much like a pyramid. it's got generally more straighter sides, it's generally narrowing at the bottom, and then it's got a quite flat, broad top. So what we can see with a narrowing base is that clearly the bottom of this graph is showing that it's narrow compared to what's above it. We can see that it's got generally straight sides, and that this time we've got a higher number of people aged over 65. So a narrow base is explaining to us that this country then has a low birth rate. The straight sides is telling us that people aren't dying. We've got a low death rate. If people were dying, then we would expect to see the graph narrowing towards the middle. Where we've got a higher number, 65 plus, then that's telling us that we have a long life expectancy. Okay, so again, same reasons as before. As we're becoming older, so we've got, like I said, we've got high numbers, we've got low, low, high. So we can see here that the graph is narrowing, it's getting lower towards the middle. It's narrowing. So we've got the birth rate is going down. As people are older, the graph isn't narrowing. So those straight sides are showing us that we've got a low death rate. And then as we get towards the top, because we've got more than we had before, where there was very few, we have a long life expectancy. And then just really quickly, just to finish, is that we might see odd stuff going on in some countries which don't really fit that pattern. What we might see instead is that the country might look 1565. So what we might see instead is graphs that show something like this. So one half might be like that. And then on the other half, what we might see is something like that. So what we've definitely got there is that something odd is happening, particularly for males. It might be that this is round about 25 to 30 years old. So let's say 25 to 29. We've got this bulge, the surge in population, which continues into the 30s, starts in the early 20s. So we've maybe got like about 10 to 15 years where all of a sudden there's this sudden appearance. So that's probably like a telltale sign that there's an immigrant population coming in. It's really unlikely if it was a baby boom, if there was a sudden rise in birth rate, then we would expect to see the other side mirror that. So if we've got males and females, if there was a rise in birth rate 29, 25 years ago, then when these people were born, they would be down here on the graph, and the graph base would be a lot wider. But if it's only one half, then that bulge probably represents migrant population. If there's bulges on both sides, it probably represents that there's been a baby boom. So that's a quick run through of the things to look for. Our job is that we've already got the demographic transition model covered, and we already know about the factors that affect birth and death rates. So it's now just about applying those and being able to give specific reasons as to what maybe has caused those either increases in life expectancy or decreases, those changes in birth rates, whether it's high or low, or those changes in death rates, again, whether it's high or low.